I grew up in a small house by a quiet river, with only my father and me. My mother left when I was too young to remember her face. Every time I asked about her, my father would simply shake his head and say in a flat voice, "She's gone." Nothing more. That sentence, cold and final, was like a door slamming shut, blocking me from a past I longed to understand. After that, I stopped asking. I learned to be silent, just like my father. We lived together, but hardly spoke. He worked all day in a small repair shop, coming home with hands stained in grease and eyes always cast downward. Our dinners were quiet. Only the sound of the spoon hitting the bowl and the ticking of the clock on the wall filled the room. I spent most of my time alone. No friends, no laughter. Just the river beside our house, the place I often wandered, listening to the slow-moving water like the rhythm of my own heartbeat. In that world, I learned not to expect anyone, not to open up, not to ask questions. I didn't. Remember my mother, because I never had the chance to. And somehow, I don't think I ever truly learned what it felt like to be loved. My father was a man of work, reserved, quiet, and always carrying the scent of oil and the weight of exhaustion on his shoulders. The small repair shop was where he had spent almost his entire life. He didn't smile, didn't make small talk, and no one ever came to visit him. His life was as simple as it was cold: work, eat, sleep. And I was the silent shadow following behind him every single day. I learned to live like him, closed off and economical with my words. While other children played and laughed, I spent my time reading or walking along the riverbank. I had no friends, not because I didn't have the chance, but because I didn't trust any kind of relationship. I once heard my father say, "People always leave. Don't expect them to stay." I said nothing at the time, but deep inside, those words left a mark, etched so deeply that nothing could erase it. I began to see the world through eyes clouded with doubt. Smiles, invitations, attempts to befriend me at school, they all felt like empty shells. I was afraid to open up, afraid of the feeling of being left behind again. So I chose to retreat. I told myself I didn't need anyone. I repeated it over and over until it became true. A cold truth, but safe. Friendship, love, these were illusions to me. I believed only in work, in silence, and in the unchanging rhythm of my routine, because at least those things never betrayed me. Everything began on a morning that seemed no different from any other. I woke up early as usual, had a quick breakfast, and headed to the repair shop where my father had already started working. No greetings, no conversation, only the sound of metal echoing in the air thick with the familiar scent of oil. I was bent over a pile of tools when the door opened. A girl stepped inside, her eyes scanning the cramped space before stopping at the counter. "My car has a small problem," she said, her voice soft like the morning breeze. I didn't look closely at her face, nor did I care to. Just another customer. I would fix the car, take the money, and return to the rhythm I had always known. I wiped my hands, asked a few brief questions, then got to work, paying no attention to her thank you or the smile she left behind as she walked out. I thought that was the end of it. But it wasn't. The next day, she came back. This time, the car wasn't broken. She simply stood at the door, smiling gently, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I frowned, ready to ignore her, but she stepped closer and said, "Can I watch you work?"
I paused for a moment. "What?" "You," she replied, stepping back slightly, not waiting for permission. The day after that, she came again, and then the day after that. Some days, she just sat quietly outside, in the same stillness I had lived in for years. No noise, no intrusion, just presence. My father began to notice. One afternoon, while I was wiping my hands, he said quietly, "That girl, she's different." I didn't respond. I didn't want to talk about her. I didn't want to think about this strange presence that kept returning. And yet, I always found myself glancing toward the door every morning. I didn't know what she wanted, didn't understand why she kept coming, kept smiling, kept standing there, gentle and steady, like something that had no name. And perhaps what confused me the most was that I no longer found her presence bothersome. She kept coming, day after day, like a quiet habit slipping into a life that had only ever included my father, myself, and the steady hum of machines. No invitation, no reason. She simply came and sat, outside the shop or leaning silently against the old wall, sometimes watching me work, sometimes saying nothing at all. She wasn't like the people I had met before, not noisy, not curious, not trying to break through the shell I had built. She simply existed, gently like a falling leaf, without a sound, yet somehow making the ground beneath feel different. One afternoon, she placed a cup of coffee on the table. "For you," she said. I didn't touch it. I don't drink coffee. She smiled. "Then I'll bring tea tomorrow." I frowned. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because you work hard." I didn't understand. I wasn't used to being cared for. It made me feel misplaced in a space I thought I knew so well. But my father was different. He took the coffee, sipped it, and looked at her with a rare warmth in his eyes. He said nothing, but I could tell. He liked having her around. She began coming in the evenings too, sitting by the river where I had walked alone for so many years. Sometimes I saw her there, gazing at the flowing water, peaceful, as if that place belonged to her. Sometimes I passed by, and she would turn, smile softly. "You like the river too?" For the first time, I stopped. I nodded, slowly but honestly. I told myself she would get bored, that she'd leave, like everyone else had. But the next day, she came again, and again. That presence, gentle, patient, asking for nothing, started to unsettle me. She didn't need me to open up. She didn't push me to speak. She was just there, like a quiet anchor, as if in this world there was still someone willing to sit beside you without needing anything in return. And that, more than anything, was what began to scare me. Scared me because I had grown used to silence. Scared me because I had grown used to no one staying. Scared me because, for the first time in my life, someone didn't leave. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting a golden-orange hue across the still water, I saw her sitting on the stone ledge, right at the spot I used to go to long ago, when the world still felt like an empty space filled only with me and the sound of flowing water. I meant to walk past her, just like always. But she turned and smiled. "You like this river too?" I don't know why, but that time I stopped. It wasn't the question, it was her eyes. They weren't searching, weren't demanding, just present. I nodded, slowly, as if admitting something for the first time in my life. She didn't say anything more. We just sat there, quietly watching the water move, as if the silence itself was already enough for the both of us. Day after day, she kept coming. Mornings at the shop, afternoons by the river. No appointments, no advance notice, but always on time. Sometimes she brought tea, placed it next to me, and said nothing at all. I didn't drink it, at least not at first. But one day, I picked it up, simply because it was warm. And somehow, both my hand and something inside me warmed up too. I didn't know what was happening, but I started waiting. Not openly, not admitting it, but I felt something missing when she didn't arrive at the usual hour. I began glancing toward the door earlier than usual. I started noticing the soft footsteps on the gravel outside. And in the afternoon, by the river, I sat and waited, without anyone needing to call my name. One evening, the sunset stretched across the water, painting it with gentle light. I saw her there, sitting in silence. Her face looked more thoughtful than usual. I walked closer and asked, "Why do you come here every day?" She looked up, smiled, that same soft smile, gentle like the last light of day. I paused. "But you don't even know anything about me." "Maybe I do," she said, her eyes still fixed on the water. I shook my head. "No, you don't know anything at all." She was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, "Maybe you think everyone leaves, but I'm still here." I didn't respond, but my chest tightened. I sat down beside her, said nothing more. Night slowly fell. The river turned dark. The breeze gently stirred her hair. We sat there, two quiet souls, side by side. And for the first time, silence didn't feel empty. It felt full of something I didn't yet have a name for. But I knew then I was no longer truly alone. I don't know when her routine became a part of my days. Every morning, I still opened the shop early as always, but my eyes would unconsciously glance toward the road where she usually appeared. Every afternoon, I still sat by the river like before, but this time, I sat there waiting for someone. I no longer refused the tea she brought. I no longer turned away when she smiled. I no longer felt bothered by her quiet presence. On the contrary, I began to feel a strange emptiness when she was absent, a quiet worry when she was late, and a sense of relief when I saw her familiar silhouette by the doorway. I didn't speak of it, didn't admit it to her, or even to myself, but the truth was quietly unfolding, like the river itself. No warning, no sound, only a slow and silent shift shaping everything it touched along the way. One afternoon, my father sat by the table, wiping his hands, gazing outside where she was talking with a few of the younger workers. Then he spoke, softly, but just enough to make me pause. "That girl, she cares about you." I looked up, frowning. "She's just being friendly." He shook his head. "No, it's more than that." I said nothing. I didn't know how to respond, because inside me, his words rang like a small bell in a room that had been silent for far too long. That evening, I saw her sitting by the river as usual, but this time I didn't walk slowly like I always did. I walked faster. When I reached her, I said nothing. I simply pulled from my pocket the small keychain she had once given me, the black string, the silver key, and placed it in my palm. She saw it, then smiled softly. "You kept it." I nodded. "Yeah."
The sun was setting, bathing the water in a warm amber glow. The breeze was gentle, but it didn't make me cold. Maybe because, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was alone in this world anymore. I turned to her, and for the first time asked the question I had always been afraid to ask. "Why do you stay?" She didn't look surprised, didn't hesitate. She just smiled, that simple smile that made everything inside me tremble. "Because I want to." And this time, I believed her. In the days that followed, everything continued as usual. She came every morning, quietly placing a cup of tea beside me without needing to say a word. Every afternoon, she sat by the river in the same old spot where the sunset always seemed gentler, perhaps only because she was there. I had grown so used to her presence that I no longer questioned why. Whenever she was silent, I stayed silent too. Whenever she smiled softly, something in me softened as well. I had never said anything clearly, had never given a name to the feelings slowly growing inside my chest, but I knew something in me was changing, and it couldn't go back to the way it was before. That evening, the sky was clear, the breeze gentle, the water dancing with golden light. She sat there like always, but her expression was quieter than usual. I walked over, sat beside her without a word, just quietly watching the current drift by. Everything felt ordinary until she spoke, her voice light, like a falling leaf. "If one day I leave, will you miss me?" A question so simple, yet it felt like a gust of wind tearing through everything I had buried for so long. I looked at her. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I didn't speak, because I didn't know how to answer. 1,000 words ran through my mind, but none reached the place she was hoping for. I wanted to say no, wanted to tell her I'm used to being alone, but my throat tightened, because deep down I knew if I spoke, I would be lying. She looked at me for a long time. Then she smiled, a different kind of smile, gentle but sad, soft but aching. "It's okay," she said, her voice fading into the breeze. "I already know the answer." That night, I lay on my bed, eyes wide open, staring at the dark ceiling. That question, brief, quiet, kept echoing in my head like a voice from the bottom of a deep well. "If I leave, will you miss me?" I turned over, pulled the blanket up, then threw it off again. I couldn't sleep, because for the first time in my life, I was afraid of something I had never paid attention to before, losing someone who had never really belonged to me. And then, in the silence of the night, I heard myself whisper inside, daring, for the first time, to ask the question in return. If she truly leaves, what will I become? I had no answer. All I knew was my heart, in that moment, felt heavier than ever before. The next morning, I opened the shop earlier than usual. The sky was clear, and the crisp morning air slipped into my chest like a gentle promise. I looked down the familiar road, the one she walked every day, holding a warm cup of tea in her hands. But today, there was no one. I told myself, maybe she's just running late. I buried myself in work, but my ears stayed alert to every sound near the door. Each time I heard footsteps on the gravel outside, I looked up, only to quietly lower my blaze again when it wasn't her. By noon, I began to feel something was off, not clearly, but enough to leave a quiet weight in my chest. Evening came, and she still hadn't shown up. I told myself, maybe she's busy, maybe it's just today, but my heart was uneasy. That night, the shop was quiet. No engine sounds. My father went home early. I stayed behind alone, sitting in the same space I knew so well, though suddenly everything felt unfamiliar. Everything was still there, the table, the tools, the river beyond, but something essential was missing. I stepped outside, walking toward the riverbank. The wind was colder than usual. The stone bench she always sat on was empty. The water kept flowing, but inside me, everything seemed to stop. I sat down, not knowing who I was waiting for, or, more truthfully, not daring to admit who I was waiting for. I just sat there, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, watching the river slowly change color in the fading light of dusk. And then I saw it. A small piece of paper, folded, placed neatly on the bench. I stared at it as if it had fallen from another world. My hand trembled as I picked it up. The paper was slightly wrinkled, perhaps from the wind. I unfolded it. The handwriting was familiar, simple, but the words cut gently into the deepest part of me. I have to go, but I was right. You will miss me. I read it over and over. Each time, my chest tightened a little more. My hands shook. My throat closed. I didn't cry, because I didn't know how. I just sat there and felt, for the first time in my life, a complete kind of loss. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my room, the soft yellow light casting shadows on the small keychain she once gave me, the only thing she left behind. I held it, turned it gently between my fingers, feeling every simple detail she had chosen for me. She was gone. No goodbye. No asking if I wanted her to stay. And now I understood. Why? Because I had never said, I needed her. But now, with her gone, I finally saw how deeply I had. She left, taking with her a calm I never knew I needed, leaving behind a void in the days that once seemed to pass by as usual, but nothing was the same anymore. The next morning, I still went to the shop. I opened the door, turned on the lights, arranged the tools, like routine, but my hands were no longer as steady as they used to be. Every movement felt slower, because I knew there would be no one bringing tea, no one standing at the door with a gentle smile, no soft eyes quietly watching me from a distance. I told myself, she's only gone for a day, maybe she'll come back. But my heart didn't believe it. I worked more, kept myself busy, like I could drown out the echo of her absence. But every time the door opened, I looked up, hoping for something familiar, and then quietly lowered my gaze again. That afternoon, I walked to the riverbank, drawn by a habit that no longer felt complete. The stone bench was still there, the wind still moved through the trees, but the familiar figure, silently watching the water, was missing. I sat down, as a reflex, and for the first time, I realized a place can carry warmth when someone once belonged to it. I took the keychain from my pocket, holding it in my hand. So small, so simple, and yet it choked me. I thought about how she used to place the tea beside me without asking for thanks, how she sat by my side without needing me to speak, how she smiled even through the longest silences. I thought about her eyes when she asked, "If I leave, will you miss me?" And I knew she had already known the answer. I just hadn't been brave enough to face it. That night, I sat alone in the familiar room, but everything felt different. Not because things had changed, but because I had. I had spent my youth building cold walls to protect my heart from pain. I had believed I was fine being alone, that no one was truly necessary, that silence was enough. But then she came, not to break anything, only to quietly exist. And in that very softness, she did what no one else could do. She opened a door I had kept locked my entire life. And now that she's no longer there, I finally see. I've learned how to feel. I've learned how to miss someone. I've learned how to love. But sadly, I only realized it after she had already gone. I had spent my whole life believing that my heart could remain closed forever. I used to think that if I let no one in, then no one could ever hurt me. I built thick walls made of silence, of doubt, of my father's old saying, "People always leave." And I believed it, down to my very bones. Until she came. No knocking, no demands, no promises to stay. She just was there. In a quiet, gentle, unintrusive way, she caused my heart, a room long shut and covered in dust, to slowly open without my noticing. She didn't try to change me, but it was exactly her not trying that changed everything. Now, every morning without her feels like an empty space. Every afternoon by the river without her shadow feels like a silence that tightens. Every cup of tea that isn't placed beside me is a quiet ache. I've begun to realize that feelings don't always need to be spoken aloud. Sometimes they are simply presence, a waiting gaze, a smile upon seeing someone, a silence that no longer feels lonely. That night, I sat in my room, the lights off, only faint moonlight casting shadows on the wall. I held the little keychain she gave me, that small object now the thread connecting me to the truest thing I've ever felt. I remembered the first time she walked into the shop, with a broken car and a smile no one paid attention to. Remembered the first time she sat by the river and simply asked if I liked the place. Remembered that soft question that left a quiet echo inside me for so long. If I leave, will you miss me? Now, I have the answer. Yes, very much so. so much that I am no longer the person I was before. And when I place my hand over my heart, I know it is no longer closed as it once was, even though she is no longer here, even though the stone bench by the river sits empty, even though that note holds only a few short lines. I have learned what it means to love, to miss, and to know that even a heart once shut tight can open because of one person.